Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Luca Cacciatore. Cacciatore. Luca,
Cacciatore, there you
welcome
go.
to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, brother.
It's good to have you on. So I wanted to speak with you just about Christianity in America, and it's a little bit of an odd topic, but we are in that time of the year. We're in the holiday season, and Christmas is approaching. And there's a lot of questions that are lingering in people's minds about the culture, about the future of America, about demographic changes, about fertility. And religion is sort of one thread at the center of all of these questions. And the dominant religion in America still today is Christianity. And so I wanted to have you on because you're someone who's written a lot about the history of Christianity in America. You yourself are a Christian. And
Mhm.
I thought maybe it would be a good, timely episode to have a discussion about it. So to get started, um, how do you think about the decline of Christianity in America? Because it's projected to be less than 50% affiliation of Christianity in the near future.
Yeah, well, in some ways it's really unique, and in some ways it's not so unique because American history is kind of full of ups and downs of religion. A lot of people might be unfamiliar with this, but at the country's founding, we were not, we were kind of in a slog religiously. We weren't
Mm,
a particularly exceptionally religious country. Um, Among the more lay people, it was more common to be religious, and we of course had the dominance of cultural Christianity that was everywhere, including with our founding fathers. But actual church going rates, actual self-identification with religion was on the decline, for sure. Um, and it was in it's kind of odd because about 30 years before we had the First Great Awakening, which kind of jump started religiosity in the country. It wouldn't be until the Second Great Awakening, which was about 10 to 15 years after the founding, that we would really see Christianity in America reach new heights.
mm,
In the First Great Awakening, you saw a lot of Calvinist revival. Those are people that believe in predestination, this type of stuff. Um, and Jonathan Edwards would be an example of that. Mostly coming out of the Puritan already, who already existed in the North, the Puritans, kind of trying to revive that type of culture. With the Second Great Awakening, you have new theology that actually develops with the holiness movement. There's people like John Wesley, and you get a lot of new hymns and songs that come out of there. You get the development of the Methodist churches and things like that. Um, and that's really when you see American religiosity go to new highs. I mean, for example, I remember somewhere, I don't have the source with me, but I remember somewhere that um, the church attendance rate at the founding was around 20 to 25%.
mm,
By the time of the Second Great Awakening, in a little bit into it, it jumps upwards of 80 to 90. That's not small. That's actually extremely substantive, and it's no wonder that the American system and the American culture was able to thrive in that environment. That's a lot of order that is
mm.
being pumped into the system. A lot of order that you don't really need to enforce. It's just people that are organizing themselves in these church communities. So
And the time period for the Second Great Awakening is what, like the antebellum era?
no, it would be more before that. It'd be 1790 to 1840.
Okay. Oh, well,
Yeah,
so, okay. So within the antebellum would be like a
sure, yeah,
subset of
yeah,
it. Yeah. Okay.
sure, yeah,
Yeah. To the
yeah. And then the first
1840s.
the first would be around the 1720s to like 1750.
Got it.
Um,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay,
The
yeah.
period in between is when the country's founded. So yeah.
Yes. I mean, a lot of my familiarity with American culture and society at that time actually comes out of Tocqueville's Democracy in America,
Hmm.
where he's
Hmm.
describing, I think 1820s or 1830s America mostly. Um, I forget what are the exact dates that he was traveling through America, but um, one of the prominent things was the church as an institution, not just for religious practice and observance and gathering, but actually as like a core social institution for the fabric of society. Churches
Yep.
themselves were used, and they still are in some parts of America, for all kinds of social um, and community oriented activities that were not explicitly religious in nature, but the church became a sort of pillar of the community in terms of organizing different kinds of events. And um, when Tocqueville talks about American society, he really does talk about these social organizations as the core of American civic life and the reason why America ended up. And there's some interesting histories on this later on, going into the late 19th and early 20th century. These civic organizations allowed Americans to collectively organize in a very spontaneous way that was very bottom up and not top down. And that was something extremely powerful that is very hard to replicate.
And it's something people constantly want to replicate, but they don't really have an answer to how.
Mm.
How do we exactly do that? Do we recreate the sort of environment that would have allowed that to happen in the 17 or 1800s? And for a lot of my life, I thought maybe that is the answer. Maybe we do try to replicate it in such a way, but I'm not as convinced that that's possible. Because the really religion wasn't the only factor that contributed to this. Of course, it was also common ancestry. It was also geography and specifically technology. We were less technologically advanced. People didn't live in ivory towers, and most people were farmers or craftsmen or doing like very remedial jobs, and it was easier for people to organize together in a bottom up way than it might be today. um, I think that if we were trying to do something similar today, you might need to talk about like the internet and how the internet would have an effect on this. People are creating communities now through the internet. I mean, they're almost
Mhm.
everywhere. So maybe there's some way to create spontaneous order with internet communities or something. But
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. But I guess staying on the theme of Christianity in America and religiosity, um, one of the interesting questions that you might ask, since there was a large surge in religious, at least behavior, I don't know if you count that as religiosity per se, but I don't know what else you would use.
mhm.
Um, what are the potential causes of that? Is something that's just an interesting, sociological and anthropological question to ask. Like if church attendance goes up from 25%, as you said earlier, to something like 90%, well, that didn't just happen because people woke up one day
uh,
and decided to go to church. There were a series of things that occurred
yeah.
that made the culture more religious in that period of time.
The biggest thing was circuit riders didn't exist until people started doing it. And circuit riders were people that would use the trains. So you need trains to exist for any of this to be possible. They would
Mm,
jump on the trains and they would travel across the growing, growing in population continent that is the United States, and they would, set a box down, jump on the box and start preaching. And people would either, because they're working a job outside, they would be like, "Hey, what's this guy talking about?" They go over, they'd hear a guy give a sermon, and usually they were pretty fiery and pretty engaging. And it was something new that they'd never seen before, and they thought it was interesting. And this happened a ton. I mean, John Wesley was one of those people that really did it, but also his friend. George Whitefield. George
Mm.
Whitefield was extremely influential with his circuit riding. I mean, he probably more than anybody really captivates the American spirit. And he was a Welsh guy, I believe. So he should, coming over with these ideas about holiness and things like this. Um, but it was just the way that he was presenting this stuff that was new and original. Um, and I think that in and of itself was a big thing. Christians were some of the first people to actually utilize um, the railroads and the shortening of distance and the shortening of time that was created with the creation of the railroads to spread the gospel. And it worked for that period. It was right place, right time. Um, Also, there is, and this is before the advent of like actual convictional, methodologically materialist atheism, where it just takes over the entirety of the world. Before that, the decline of religion was not so much tied to scientific advancement as it was ideology. In
Mm.
this case, the Enlightenment and liberalism and things like that. So where liberalism peaked is also where deism and these other types of ideas peaked. It was less tied to hard sciences, like evolution or these types of things that people question today. So I think people still deep down kind of longed for spirituality. And the reason I say that is because even the deists were deeply culturally Christian. I mean, you just
Right.
read everything that they say, and it's almost like they're trying to grasp at whatever faith is left. For them, it was this kind of um, distant God who was providential but not actually relational. So they still kind of yearn for something, I think. Um,
Yeah, well,
Later
it's in.
on, and this kind of
Go
goes
ahead.
back to why so I'm sorry. This kind of goes back to why I think religion, the state of religion today is different
Mm.
in a lot of ways. But yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting you delineated some of the um I guess technological or scientific advances that have become affiliated with the decline in religion, um, and how they differ from the past. I thought it was interesting though that you brought up the railroads as a catalyst for the spread um, of religiosity, because prior to that you had mentioned that the technology was sort of an antagonist, and so it seems like technology could go either way in terms of helping or harming the spread of religiosity, and maybe it's just up to um, you know religious people to decide how they want to utilize it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really, I guess, depends on the technology. I think that not all are created equal. Some things can really benefit Christians, some things might not. Um, it's yet to be seen if the internet, as it exists, is beneficial for the gospel or isn't. I mean,
Mm.
there's a lot of problems like that we might not even be paying attention to. Like there's so many parasocial relationships that are created on the internet. Is that really conducive to church building and community building? Um, I- I've known people that have used the internet to create churches, but I've known even more people that have used the internet to apostatize and leave the faith. So
Right.
it's really a give and take here. But that's also why I think that the state of Christianity today and how it relates to the culture, I think is like fundamentally different in a lot of ways. Um, the rise of science and that has posed a serious threat, and a lot of people like to push that to the side, but it is a serious threat,
Yeah.
and it hasn't been addressed by the church at all. And that's why people are leaving. I mean, it's really simple. If you ask them, they'll tell you that. This isn't a mystery. It's not like a lot of Christians, I think, like to think that it's something deeper, like they hate God or something. No, I mean they don't believe in God. Why? How could they possibly hate Him? So it really is connected to that, and it's not one of these things, where in the past it would ebb and flow, and there might be a massive upsurge because of a great preacher or something. People's assumptions are different. People's assumptions are now formed by academia and these types of things. So
Mm.
there needs to be, I think, a serious engagement by Christians on very difficult topics, and a ability to um, bring all, because there has been numerous findings, within the Christian sphere of the academy on the Bible and its world, the context of the Bible, biblical hermeneutics, types
Mhm.
of things that are important for justifying the Christian faith. We need to find a way to, actually facilitate that to normal people, so normal people can start talking about this and, specifically prevent people from leaving.
Yeah.
So
Well, what's interesting to me, I guess, is that, it's not as if Christians and Christian organizations have not participated in developments on the internet. It just seems to me as if, for whatever reason, they haven't been very successful at getting the messaging correct. So one example of this is Christian media, right? Like Christian films. There's a lot of effort that's put into creating alternative media to, what Hollywood spits out at people that is, based in people's Christian faith and Christian ideals about how to live life. The problem is that it is almost never successful on the market, right? And so, um, maybe it's cope to say that the market itself is somehow antithetical to those values, but maybe it means that for whatever reason, Christian messaging just hasn't figured out how to actually play in this new competitive sphere.
yeah. Well, I mean, that is one of the things, right? There is a case to be made that it might be antithetical. The early church, I'm thinking of Hippolytus and Hippolytus's church order. There's a number of things that, we would think it'd be okay for Christians to be involved in that the early church was not okay with. I mean, going to the games, that's not just gladiatorial games, that's also like chariot racing, things that are not necessarily violent. They were seen as distractions
Mm,
and, potentially something you could be kicked out of the church for. So there is a unfortunate, um, I think, combination of the world with the church today, and a lot of people see that. That's another reason for people leaving is that the church doesn't really have its own self identity. It's not able to set the tone and set the lines of the culture. It's kind of always um, running in the background. So but in regards to the internet and Christian, Hollywood and these types of things, um, it seems like it kind of, and maybe I'm wrong, but tell me if you agree with me. It seems like it kind of peaked in like the late 2000s, and since then it's been
yeah.
conservative media and these types of conservative things that have like taken its place, and are trying to, appeal to the same type of people, but not with, a Christian message, really just kind of with like a political conservative message. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period definitely in early 2000s, I remember, where even Christian music was like mainstream,
Oh, yeah.
right? And
Christian
and
metal, it was everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like now it's sort of eh, people are like, what is that even? Like no one listens to that. No one would even know what that is. And maybe it was vulgar, maybe, and by vulgar I just mean like common.
Yeah.
Like maybe it wasn't like the highest um form of music. We're talking about like Creed and Switchfoot and whatever, but like
Yeah.
Under Oath.
But a lot of those guys have like a lot of those guys left the faith. A ton of them.
Mhm.
When I think of the, Christian bands that I was into in my youth, like Under Oath and As I Lay Dying and Switchfoot, two of those three are not even Christian anymore. And there's countless other examples of
Mm.
that. And it's because of this trying to appeal to the culture thing without actually be rooted in having a self identity. So this brings, innumerable challenges to Christians. How do we utilize technology without having it basically utilize us? How do we um, put our convictions through these new kind of like planes and have them not manipulate how we think and act?
Yeah.
And uh, there might be lessons to have in how the early American reformers and circuit riders were able to do it. But it is like the internet is different than a locomotive. The internet is
I'm gonna make that a quote for the episode.
yeah,
The internet
that'd be
is
great.
different than a locomotive. Luca
Yeah,
Cacciatore.
that's great. But it is. I mean, the internet talks back to you literally. Like people
Hmm.
can where a locomotive is just kind of like a plane, like you hop on it and then you go to your destination so you can do what you want to do. When you're on the internet, you hop on it and then other people can fight back against you. Other people can tell you you're stupid and they might be right. Maybe you are like wholly not prepared for certain things that come at you. And Christians need to have answers for that.
Yeah, one other possibility, besides trying to sort of co-opt mainstream culture, is that they just play the long game, right? And I'm thinking specifically here about fertility, about Christian fertility rates, and the fertility rates of other religious minorities in the U.S., which are higher than secular and nuns and atheists and all the others, by like a good margin, even though they're not great. Um, they are reproducing, better than those other groups.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's one, and I know it's not the most Christian message. Like Christians, they don't want to leave a bunch of people behind. But
Sure.
one possibility is that they just, quote unquote, win the culture by
Hmm.
being the only people left,
Yeah.
because no one else is having kids.
No, you're right. I mean, Eric, you're totally probably familiar with Eric Kaufman's work on this. Shall the religious inherit the earth?
Mm,
He's talked a lot about this, and I think that I'm not. It's not that I'm super skeptical because I mean the data's there. The question really that you have to ask is, okay, will the will people leaving the faith will it not exponentially increase? Because if it stays the same, I think we're good. If it exponentially increases, which is certainly possible because it has, over the last 100 years, at some points exponentially increased. Um, then we might have problems because so many people will be leaving the faith that it won't even matter. Um, uh, so one example is Mormons. Mormons used to be above the fertility rate compared to the rest of the country.
mm.
They're a kind of like more closed off group. They have their own geographic distribution compared to other Christians. Um, they were able to do this. Well, now, I mean, they're kind of normalizing. They're kind of becoming like every other white person in America, and their fertility rate, I think, is like 1.8 or something. It's or one point. I think it's 1.9. Which is slightly better than the rest of the country, which is around like 1.6, 1.7.
Still
Um,
below
and
replacement. Not good
still below
enough.
replacement, still below replacement. And really the only big group that we can talk about that is well above replacement are the Amish.
Hmm.
And this kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier about, is technology misanthropic or not? I mean, for the Amish certainly think it is, and they're the only ones that are kind of surviving this whole birth crunch. Their fertility rate is fine. I'm not specifically sure the exact number, but it's not even close to a problem. So if you want to see like what does American Christianity look like in 100 years, well, conservative evangelical Protestantism will still exist.
Yeah.
It's not in an apocalyptic state. I think it's a little bit below replacement, but it's really not that bad. Mormons will still exist, but they'll definitely there's going to be some exponential change there. They're going to take a hit. Liberal Protestantism will probably just completely go extinct. And that doesn't even if the that's going to happen even if the birth rate problems change. People are just leaving it so much that it's going to go extinct. It'll probably if the birth rate problems change, it'll probably be around a little bit longer, but really not that much longer. So But what we're looking at really in America is like a permanent 20% of the country, kind of like the founding, actually. Like a permanent 20 to 25% of the country that attend church regularly that are religious. Um, and that has been the case for the last 20 years. Really, like 20 to 25% of the country attend church weekly, are, devotionally Christian. And that's kind of been stagnant. It's really been the people that attend church monthly or every other week or these types of things that have fallen off within the
Mm,
last 20 years, which is most self-identified Christians. Most self-identified Christians don't attend church weekly. Most self-identified Christians, you would probably say they're more than a cultural Christian in their devotion to the faith, but they're not as dedicated as someone who is like a part of the church and attends it regularly. So those people are leaving the faith rapidly, and also not reproducing as much. So the future of Christianity does look different, but in some respects might look pretty similar. It depends what you consider a Christian. Do you consider a Christian, for example, someone who attends church weekly? If you consider it somebody who attends church weekly, then it might look pretty similar. If you consider it somebody who just identifies as a Christian,
mm.
in their public life, then it's going to look a lot different. You're going to be a
Yeah, well,
minority if that's what
I
you
just I don't put a lot of stake in identity, so I think I
Okay.
just look at that behavior, and if they're not following the behavior, so a Christian, then
Yeah.
I don't really care what you tell me. Like you
Yeah.
could tell me you're from Mars.
I agree.
But
I agree. But that
and
but that's
and
interesting.
I'm
That's
saying this
interesting
as
that
someone who's not an actual Christian. Like
sure.
you know,
Sure.
I, I have no dog in
But it's
this
a
fight.
natural thing. I mean, that's how you get rid of the inauthentic people, right? I mean, in your in
Mhm.
your in your life.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, 20 to 25%. I mean, that's been the case. And a lot of people have talked about this, but it's been the case for like 20 years that those have been the people that consistently go to church. They consider themselves evangelical a lot of the time. Um, and it seems like it's pretty stagnant. It's only gone down a little bit.
Mhm.
So, and if the Eric Kaufman's work is correct, then that will stay stagnant or even increase in the future. There is some sense in American Christianity that it will just kind of be what it is for a long time. But like we were saying, there's another sense in which it's going to have some serious problems, um, culturally specifically, and how it influences the rest of the country.
I am just curious as a young Christian man yourself. I mean, what is your insight into why people are leaving the church?
My insight's mostly um, that it is related to how we engage the world. Because I think we engage the world on all the wrong things and we disengage on all the wrong things. What I mean by that is we're so culturally entangled with the world when it comes to our sexual ethics, when it comes to basically all of our ethics, um, and our anthropology, how we view how humans relate to each other. We just kind of adopt, the anthropology of whatever country we're in. More often than not, a liberal anthropology. Instead of like an anthropology that's like rooted in community, that's rooted in the church, that's rooted in something that's a lot less individualistic. Um, so I think that that's a problem. But then we like don't engage like obvious things like science, like evolution, like these types of things, which Christianity has nothing to say about because it's not a science textbook. I mean, there's no reason why we have to read the Bible like a methodological modern
Hmm.
when it's not that's not what it's saying. I mean, like there's great work by John Walton on this about the Old Testament in its world and interpreting it in its world. And you don't arrive at certain scientific answers that they weren't asking and they weren't answering. So I think that yeah we're I think we're engaging the world in all the wrong ways and we're disengaging it in all the wrong ways. There needs to be like a realignment of what it means to be a Christian. I think one that's
It's
more. that's more embodied, one that's
Mhm.
more has to do with living the faith out, I think.
Yeah, what's interesting, it's always interesting to me to hear people talk about the discrepancies between Christianity and science, because you're right, like very little of Christianity has really anything to say about science or evolution. I mean, certain fundamentalist views on Protestantism do, but those
Mhm.
are not at all the mainstream. And if you look at a lot of really um, well-known scientists, I mean, it's definitely not a majority or even a plurality, but there are like very notable cases of very dedicated, very competent, well-known scientists who also had a strong faith in their private life.
Mhm.
And, and also for those of you who are more familiar with the history of natural science and philosophy of science, the scholastics pursued their understanding of nature because they perceived untangling the puzzle of nature as untangling the plans of God. And
Yeah.
so our entire um, scientific endeavor is actually, at least historically, innately tied to this question of knowing God, of becoming closer to God through our understanding of nature. And it really has always just kind of like astounded me and made me a little bit like grossed out the way in which, particularly the new atheist movement, was able to sort of tie science to atheism in this way that never made any sense to me. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly through arguments about evolution and so forth. Um, it's just
And it's not,
completely absurd. And by
I'm
the
not,
way, not only
yeah.
does science doesn't say anything about God.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it's
It's
completely
incapable,
absurd.
kind of like fundamentally incapable of it in a lot of ways. Um, yeah, and it's not to say there's this like Kantian divide or anything. It's
Mhm.
to say that they're just asking and answering different questions. I mean, the Bible says that God forms us in the womb. Everybody knows that that's not, talking about God literally, getting in there and literally doing it. Like people understand that intuitively that this is a way that we are describing God's creative action in the replication of meiosis and stuff. Like we understand that like this is what's happening here. And they didn't even know about meiosis and all this stuff.
Right.
They're just speaking about uh, really the quality of what's happening, not the actual events and the actual specifics, the science behind it. So there's ways to talk about, for example, creation in a similar way, and that's how creation I think is talked about in the Bible. It's talked about. It's the difference, as Walton talks about the difference between a house story and a home story. When somebody asks you about your home, you don't tell them about the bricks and the layers and how it was constructed by the builders when they had the building. No, you tell them about the different rooms in your house and what they mean to you and how they play into the bigger picture of your home and what it means to be a human in that specific place. So it's just they're just asking different questions. But Christians think that they're asking the same questions. You talked about how fundamentalists are the ones that really hold this, and it's not. But they've had an outsized influence, I think, on Christianity at large. And I think people are developing this false misconception that you must kind of like believe this certain thing to be a Christian or something like that. When young Earth creationism, these types of things weren't even didn't really even exist until the 1920s, and but that's a whole other thing to talk about. Um, we were talking a little bit earlier about the Great Awakenings. There's actually two more. Um, most people would say there's one more, but I think there's two more. Um, there's the Third Great Awakening, which was at the end of the 19th century, kind of into the 20th century, and that's where you get some of the. That's actually where my church comes out of. That's where you get the Restoration movements, kind of like back to the Bible type people, who really stress that, and the eschatology becomes a big thing for people. So like the rapture, like this type of stuff,
Mhm.
people start to pay attention to Revelation and prophecy. There's a lot of good and bad, in my opinion, that comes with that. People are probably mostly familiar with the bad stuff, like false prophecies and people dying, and yeah, like it can get pretty dark. A lot of cults and stuff came out of the Third Great Awakening. Um, and then the fourth, you could say the fourth really was, and this is where I want to talk about with you a little bit, um, the evangelical revolution of the
Mhm.
60s, the 60s into, I want to say, like the 80s. Mostly the
Yeah.
80s is
Yeah,
when
that
we
sounds right.
usually associate it with that. That was profound, and like the other great awakenings, had a lot of political consequence. The evangelical revolution propelled Reagan to victory. It propelled kind of an entirely new form of political Christianity into the public consciousness, and it really stayed with us up until the 2000s. I want to say, I kind of grew up with that superstructure still existing.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, well,
yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
it's still politically very influential for sure.
Sure, sure.
Definitely, people talk about it reflecting in our U.S. Israel policy, which we won't go into right now.
Oh,
But
absolutely. No, but absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
basically evangelicals behind that. And so it's still definitely a force, especially in certain like the South and so forth. Um, but I think the issue really is that, like, in order for there to be um a future, they have to still be capturing the minds of young people.
hmm
And I don't know all the details of why the evangelical movement took off. Maybe it was a response to sort of the cultural and sexual revolution in the 60s. That would make sense to me. Um,
Well,
but
it was in part also utilization of new planes, like the
mm,
circuit riders did. It was
right,
the utilization of
radio and
specifically
television.
video. Yeah, that's where you get
Yeah,
the televangelist, right? The
right.
and who captivated single mothers everywhere, right?
So so really
The
so
so
really
evangelist.
the thing is figuring out how to use these new tools, right? Like,
Yeah,
where are the televangelists of the internet? I mean, I'm sure they're out.
yeah,
I'm sure there are large,
sure,
Christian
sure.
YouTubers or whatever, but
But that's exactly
they're
the
not
problem.
culturally very salient.
Right, but the problem here is that a YouTuber, first of all, has to organically develop an audience. They're not going to get put on a station that is just going to exist for millions of people to watch. And they also have to deal with responses. Like people often, especially everyone knows in the late 2000s, the rise of like atheist channels on YouTube and stuff.
Hmm.
They would spend 90% of their time railing against Christian creators on the same platform or televangelists outside of it, and they were compelling to a lot of young people. I mean, in a lot of ways, the left, as we understand it today, and even a lot of the alt right and stuff, find their roots in like atheist and skeptic YouTubers that kind of made the jump over to political content later. So I think that the and this is the problem for Christians in the internet is you have to deal with people fighting back. It's not a one-way street. It's not, like I said, it's not a locomotive, and it's also not TV. It's different than that. You have to deal with actual arguments and the logos of things, and I think we are able to do that. It's just a matter of finding people capable that also want to spend the time making video content. And there are examples of people that are doing this. Inspiring philosophy is a big one. He's on Twitter and he's everywhere and he debates people all the time. um, and Mike Winger is another one. He's a very popular one. So people are doing it, and those two examples are successful examples of people that are doing it. It's just not enough to say there's like a movement or something yet. I think it might happen, but
Yeah,
I'm a little bit skeptical that there's enough capable people to really engage that type of stuff.
I think the other thing, at least for I won't speak about young women. At least for young men, both of us are young men or whatever, recently young men. I just turned 30, so I don't know if that still
Oh yeah,
applies.
you're a young guy. Come on,
But
dude. Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
but it is this issue of engagement with the world. It's like there are so many other I guess distractions or opportunities or temptations that are out there for a young
yeah.
person to go after.
Yep.
that are easily available, not only in the internet, but also just broadly in life these days, that I think part of the issue is Christians and Christian messaging hasn't figured out how to find something compelling to give young men as an alternative. And I'm only going to speak
Hmm.
about young men because I don't know what to say about young women. Um,
You're right. It's I think the obvious answer, this is what I'm trying to help with, is providing a moral foundation and moral framework for people's actions, like an actual way to live your life differently than everybody else, that although it's different, people just can't help but notice how virtuous it is, and can't help but notice how reliable uh you are as a Christian man. And I think that listen, Muslims are doing it. You see Andrew Tate, you see all these other people. Um, Stoicism is making a comeback. Why is Christianity not here as well? Why is Christianity not providing that for young men? And you see in some corners, it seems like Christianity as it stands today is kind of the among kids, among the youth, is kind of the unique um, unique plane for people that are interested in, like, I don't know, doctrine or theological debates about, like, basically useless things, nothing that can actually be embodied, nothing that can actually be taken into real life and applied, and with churches that could be established. Um, so when people think of Christianity nowadays, I think they think of, like a Twitter Catholic or something, somebody who is not particularly interested in actual embodied faithfulness. So that's why you see, Andrew Tate, for example, that's why you see these people, I think, drift towards Islam, um, or other things, like other philosophies like Stoicism and these types of things. But Christianity is prepared to do that as well, and I think prepared better than most religions, because unlike Islam, Christian morality isn't jurisprudential. Christian morality um, is far different than that. It's much more ethical. It's much more concerned on ethical questions, and in some ways consequential ethical questions. Um, and it's different than Stoicism too, because we see room for pleasure. We don't see pleasure as inherently a bad thing.
hmm.
Um, so moderation is a virtue in Christianity, for one. Um, but I don't know. It just doesn't, like. Do you see these types of people that are on social media that are really stressing, I guess, the morality aspects of the
Well,
faith? It just
I
I don't
just
know.
think that I think that men need something more than just moralism. Like
Sure.
they actually need something epic to be aspiring towards. And
Okay.
so giving them a Christian example of that, um, I think would do a lot to get young men to come over to the faith or to not leave the faith because they look at it
Hmm.
and they just see it as kind of like stuffy and overbearing and, you know, confining rather than expansive. And
Yeah.
I can understand why something like Islam, at least superficially, um, would resonate more just because you have this concept of like the inner war and the outer war, and it's very masculine in that
Yeah.
sense. Um, and Christianity hasn't had something like that in its essence, uh, at least in its rhetoric, sorry, rather than essence, in its rhetoric for a very long time.
I think that's true. Yeah. I didn't even think of that, but I think you're right. And just trying, I guess, trying to explain that. There's different flavor, right? You have like your pacifistic Christianity,
Mm,
which you can frame in, I guess, an epic way as well. I mean, you can frame martyrdom in an epic way, like they used to do in the first century, about how it's like the ultimate expression of rejection of so-called authority, and and submitting yourself to true authority. So kind of this like epic thing. And then you have, of course, like the Christendom type of way of going about it, which is like crusades and that type of stuff, where you see people that idolize that some. among kids these days as well. I don't think that's a coincidence, right? It's because of like what you were saying, like this like epic strive for like epic things and vitality
Yeah,
specifically.
I think men want intensity, right?
Hmm.
And so just talking, I mean, moderation is good, but if you're just talking about, moderation and going to
Sure.
church every week and so forth, like especially to like a young guy who's like full of testosterone and energy and wants something to
Yeah.
do with their life, like it doesn't strike them as, um, at least that's how I felt about it when I was younger. Um,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I think you're, and this is a little bit of what I was trying to get at. Like, it needs to be embodied. Like this whole thing where it's just like some doctrinal thing that you disagree with on the internet or whatever. But but that kind of gets back to maybe my criticism of people that are trying to restore epic Christianity as it exists today is they don't embody any of it. You know, it's just like kind of
like
like
it's not
weird
enough to
mute.
just make memes about like, the Crusades or
Exactly.
whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Like it's just like weird musings on the internet. Like there's no actual substance. I mean, I'm personally interested in people that are like building stuff specifically, like Doug Wilson and Moscow, Idaho. There's
Mhm.
other examples of Catholic groups that are doing stuff in the middle of the country. Like these are interesting things that you can literally move and be a part of that are happening right now. And people, yeah, I get the culture on the internet, it's important, but it's really like it's not going to lead people to the kingdom. It just isn't in the way that these people are, these groups I just explained are doing it. um but I mean, and listen, specifically Moscow, I'm more familiar with them. They're very big on the whole epic thing. I mean, that's a big part of what they're doing, and it's no coincidence that they're successful in what they're doing. But they also live it out. I mean, to them, it's not propositional. To them, it's like actually how they live, and how they go about their lives. So um, I guess, you need to combine it with a sort of actual way of living. And for me, as someone who's more inclined towards nonviolence and stuff, what that means is giving up, I guess, sort of like violent tendencies that I might have from my youth or something, and seeking other ways of going about it. But it can be radical. I mean, anything can be radical if you frame it in a way, I guess you could say. But that's the problem. I think the problem is we don't even try to frame Christianity, whichever expression we're talking about, in an epic or radical way, because it's so feminine. It's not trying to even appeal to, at the end of the day, it's not trying to appeal to men that are oriented in that way. Um, it's mostly trying to appeal to women.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's sort of something to consider working on.
Yeah, that's the
In the
whole seeker
meantime.
sensitive church, all that. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, Luca, it's been great catching up and
yeah, for
talking about
sure.
Christianity in America. Um, Christmas is coming up around the corner. Any thoughts for people to just consider or contemplate or even, I guess, pray about um, over the holiday?
Mm. Well, I'll say a couple things. First of all, it might sound cheesy. Uh, be with your family. If you're living in a apartment across the country, try to find a way to like see your family, right? Not just your friends, but like your family.
Hmm.
Try to go out of your way to do that. Try to go to a church service. I mean, it 9 times out of 10, it's those types of holiday experiences that might actually get you back in church, because those are the only times you're going to go otherwise. So try to do that. Also, pray for the country, the state of the country right now, because I don't think that religion necessarily is going to get us out of it. I don't know what's going to get us out of this. Nothing might get us out of this, but the church will still exist, and people. I think the American people will still exist too. So I think we need to pray for that as well. Um,
All
that's all I got.
right. Where can people find you to read or learn more about your
Sure.
work?
I mostly do like hard news stuff now. So I
Mhm.
have a muck rack like journalist page about that. But if you want to read some of my opinion stuff, which covers a little bit of Christianity America, specifically like the Puritans, I had a piece on the rise of liberal Christianity and in the Puritan North. You can find that on my link tree, which is in my Twitter page, which is just my name, Luca H. Cacciatore, just to make it easier. You can find it there. It's under New Conservatives. So it's an old blog I had.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, man. Merry Christmas.